He laughed in her face. "Translate this document and I'll give you my leftovers." The boardroom erupted in mockery. But what he didn't know, that folder held the very secrets that would destroy him. And the quiet intern he humiliated was about to expose everything and bury his empire. This isn't just revenge. This is justice. The air in the boardroom was thick with ambition, coffee, and quiet contempt. Sleek chairs lined the glass table like soldiers at attention surrounding the man who sat at the head of it all. Vincent Harren, the CEO of Harren Corp. He was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. His expensive suit, sharp gaze, and cold smile did all the talking. Across from him, standing awkwardly with a leather folder in her arms, was Liana Tran, the new intern. She wore no designer labels, no air of entitlement. Her suit was plain, her shoes scuffed, and her voice, though clear, had a quiet edge that few in the room had the patience to hear. Vincent barely looked up from his phone. "So, intern," he muttered, scrolling through his emails. "What are you good at? Filing coffee orders or fetching translations?" A few of the board members chuckled. One even sipped their latte with a smug grin. Liana said nothing. She clutched the folder tighter. The silence that followed wasn't out of respect. It was the silence of a room full of people too powerful to care. Then Vincent finally glanced up, his eyes landing on the folder in her arms. He gestured lazily toward it. "Hand it over. Let's see what you've got." She stepped forward and extended the folder. Vincent took it with theatrical exaggeration, as if it were beneath him to touch something that hadn't been proofread by 3 assistants. He opened it slowly, skimming the first few pages. It was a document, over 200 pages, written entirely in an obscure dialect of Vietnamese, tied to a rare trade law dating back decades. It was the type of thing no software could translate with accuracy. You needed precision, cultural fluency, intellect, patience. He read the first few lines, then snorted. "Translate this document and I'll give you my leftovers," he said, tossing it back toward her like garbage. The room burst into laughter. Someone clapped. Another slapped the table, wheezing. A few others tried to stifle their giggles, but failed. Liana didn't flinch. She didn't flush red. She didn't fumble. She simply picked up the folder from the polished floor, dusted it off gently, and looked at Vincent. Not with anger, not with fear, but with a steady, deliberate calm that was so unnerving it momentarily muted the laughter. For a brief second, Vincent met her gaze, and in that second, something in his gut shifted. Just a twitch. The same gut instinct that had helped him rise to the top of $1 billion empire whispered danger. But ego is louder than intuition, and so he brushed it off, chuckling as he leaned back in his chair. Liana nodded once. "Understood," she said quietly. Her voice barely echoed in the boardroom, but it carried weight. And then, just as calmly, she turned and walked out of the room. The door clicked softly behind her. Vincent leaned forward and muttered something to his CFO, who laughed again. "She'll quit by Friday," he said confidently. "Mark my words. They always do." But she wouldn't. Because what Vincent didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Liana hadn't taken this internship to learn or to climb. She had taken it to finish something. To find something. And the moment that folder landed in her hands, everything changed. He had meant to humiliate her, to remind her that power belonged to men in suits, not quiet girls from immigrant families. But instead, he had unknowingly handed her the key to everything. And in doing so, he had just started the countdown to his own downfall. The mocking laughter in that room would be the last time Vincent Harren felt untouchable. Because Liana was done being underestimated. And she wasn't leaving. She was going deeper. And when she came back, it wouldn't be with a translation. It would be with the truth. And the truth would be louder than his laughter ever was. The night had fallen over the city like a heavy blanket, muffling the noise of ambition and traffic into a low, constant hum. In a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the 12th floor of a weathered building, Liana Tran sat at a small desk with a flickering desk lamp casting long shadows across her face. The CEO's laughter still echoed in her head, sharp, dismissive, unforgettable. She could still hear the jeering boardroom, the way they had looked right through her, as if she was no more than office furniture. But Liana wasn't thinking about revenge. Not yet. She was focused on the document. Her eyes scanned the first few pages carefully. The dialect was difficult, a blend of archaic legal terms and rural Vietnamese phrasing that barely survived in modern language. This wasn't something a translation app could decipher. It wasn't just words on paper, it was buried history wrapped in codes and double meanings. But to Liana, it was familiar. The way the language curled around the phrasing, the formal yet concealed tone. She had seen this kind of writing before. She reached into the top drawer of her desk and pulled out an old notebook. Faded, worn, and fraying at the edges, the cover had a single name etched into it. Thu Trang's her mother. Flipping it open with care, she turned to the back, where clippings of old reports, handwritten notes, and scribbled translations lay hidden like forgotten relics. Her mother had once worked for Harren Corp too, in the same translation division. She was smart, respected, and quiet. Too quiet for her own good. One evening, many years ago, her mother had come home different. Pale, shaken, she had packed a small bag, kissed Liana on the forehead, and said she needed to go away, for a few days. But those days turned into weeks, and then months, and eventually silence. No funeral, no answers. Just a missing person report and a locked file no one ever followed up on. But now, staring at the document Vincent had carelessly thrown at her, Liana began to understand. This was no random translation task. It wasn't an errand meant to humble her. It was the same type of contract her mother had once worked on. The kind filled with intentional misdirection, financial camouflage, and corporate treachery hidden behind neutral legalese. The same type of document her mother had been translating before she vanished. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the ink on the paper. Names, numbers, locations, a trail. And at the bottom of one page a signature stood out as V. Harren tears Vincent. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The ache in her shoulders was nothing compared to the pressure inside her chest. This wasn't about a job anymore. It wasn't about pride, or proving herself in front of a smug boardroom. This was about her mother, about the truth that had been buried under corporate smiles and silenced by fear. And now, the same man who had likely signed her mother's fate had dared to mock her. With the same kind of document. The irony would have been bitter, if the fury wasn't already swallowing it whole. She stared out the window for a long time, watching headlights snake through the city streets below. The skyline glimmered like a false promise. Tall, shining buildings built on silent stories like hers. She thought about all the other people like her mother, people who had worked hard and kept their heads down, only to be erased when they became inconvenient. She thought about how many families had been left in the dark with only questions and grief. Then she thought about Vincent's smirk, that hollow laughter, the way he never even looked at her like she was a person. Just another nobody. She closed the notebook and picked up a pen. Her expression didn't change. It was still calm, almost serene. But behind her soft features something deeper stirred, something long buried. The scar she had carried for years, losing her mother without answers, had just been reopened. But this time, she wasn't a helpless girl. She would translate the document, yes, word for word, phrase by phrase. But she wouldn't stop there. She would piece together the full picture, not just what it said, but what it meant, who it implicated, and where the trail led. She wouldn't just expose what Vincent had tried to hide. She would unravel everything. Liana smiled faintly, though it never reached her eyes. The scar behind her smile ran deeper than anyone in that boardroom would ever understand. But soon, they would feel it. Every word she translated brought her closer, not just to the truth, but to justice. And she wouldn't stop. Not until the world knew what Harren Corp had done. And not until Vincent Harren saw that same folder again. This time in court. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds of Liana's apartment, casting pale stripes across the hardwood floor. She hadn't slept. The pages of the document were still sprawled across her desk, marked with sticky notes, scribbled annotations, and cross-reference with her mother's notebook. The more she uncovered, the clearer the picture became. This was bigger than anyone realized. Offshore accounts linked to shell companies, massive sums of unreported capital movements, government contracts awarded to ghost firms, and the same name kept reappearing, like a fingerprint pressed across every dirty corner. Vincent Harren. Liana moved to the kitchen and poured herself a mug of cold coffee. Her hands ached. Her eyes burned, but she couldn't stop. Something deep inside her, something older than rage, was pushing her forward. A quiet determination built from years of unanswered questions, from a childhood marked by absence, from the haunting silence that followed her mother's disappearance. A sudden, faint knock interrupted her thoughts. She froze. It wasn't loud, just a soft tap against the bottom edge of her front door. Not the kind of knock someone made when they wanted to talk. The kind someone made when they didn't want to be noticed. Cautiously, Liana walked over, heart thumping in her chest. She opened the door a crack and glanced down. There was no one there, just an envelope, plain, unmarked. She picked it up slowly, closed the door behind her, and locked it. Her fingers hesitated for a second before she tore the flap open. Inside was a single photo, a grainy zoomed-in image of her from the night before, standing just outside the Harren Corp headquarters. Her face was in focus, her posture calm. But the image screamed, "You're being watched." Beneath the photo, a small piece of paper was folded in half. She unfolded it carefully. One sentence was scrawled across it in sharp black ink. "Stop digging." That was it, no name, no threat spelled out, just a warning. Her mouth went dry. She glanced toward her window instinctively. Was someone watching her now? She pulled the curtain closed, heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. Someone had followed her. Someone knew she had the document. The moment shifted. Fear crept in like cold air through a broken window. But even as the fear wrapped itself around her spine, something else pushed back, resolve. They were trying to intimidate her. just like they had done to her mother, just like they had likely done to anyone who got too close. Liana walked back to her desk and picked up her mother's notebook again. She stared at it. All these years, she had believed her mother had vanished because she'd made a mistake, trusted the wrong people, or been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But now she saw the truth. Her mother had been targeted. Silenced. She remembered something. A single memory. Her mother, late at night, whispering on the phone in Vietnamese. Words Liana hadn't understood at the time, but that now echoed in her mind. They think I'm just a translator. They don't see me coming. Liana ran her fingers over the surface of the notebook, her pulse slowly steadying. She had inherited more from her mother than just language. She had inherited her strength, her courage, her fire. She scanned her notes again. She needed help. Someone who could protect the data she had already uncovered, someone who could verify her findings in case something happened to her. But she couldn't go to the police. Harren Corp had deep pockets and deeper connections. If she made one wrong move, she'd disappear before she could finish this. There was one option. A shadowy forum her mother had once bookmarked. A network for whistleblowers and digital truth seekers. She remembered the screen name The Next Hunter as a ghost hacker, known for exposing corrupted judges, illegal biotech experiments, and corporate espionage. No one knew their real name. No one ever met them. But people said if you found Nike's Hunter, and your cause was just, they would answer. Liana opened her laptop, activated a VPN, and typed in the encrypted address. The forum looked as barren and hostile as she remembered. Black background, blinking cursor, no help, no support, no rules. She typed a message and attached a heavily redacted version of the document. To Nike's Hunter, I have something that can destroy Vincent Harren. It cost my mother her life, they've already warned me. If you're real, respond. Time is running out, Dasi. She hit send, then she waited. The minutes felt like hours, but before long a blinking notification appeared. A reply. Yes, you have 48 hours. Meet me. Alone, no electronics, park bench, Pier 9, sundown. So she stared at the message. Her pulse quickened again, but not from fear this time. It was beginning. The whispered warning left at her door hadn't stopped her. It had only confirmed what she already suspected. She wasn't paranoid. She was a threat. And now, for the first time since she picked up that folder, she wasn't alone. The pages were beginning to blur together, but Liana refused to stop. Her eyes were bloodshot, her body aching from hours hunched over the desk. But every line she translated brought another layer of truth to the surface. The document that Vincent Harren had tossed at her like trash was not just some obscure legal contract. It was a carefully constructed blueprint for corruption. A spiderweb of falsified partnerships, offshore holdings, and secret transfers, all designed to conceal millions of dollars. It wasn't written in one language. That was the trick. Vietnamese legal phrasing was peppered with archaic Chinese characters, disguised under business codes from other countries. And more importantly, the language had been intentionally twisted. It wasn't just hard to understand. It was designed to mislead. You had to know what to look for. And thanks to her mother's old notebook, Liana did. She highlighted phrases, marked suspicious clauses, and began piecing together a map. At first, it looked like a contract for importing rare earth minerals. But deeper into the document, she discovered something alarming. Several of the supposed supplier companies didn't exist. One didn't even have a registered address. Another, when searched, redirected to a flower shop in rural Cambodia, but the money was real. The transfers were traceable. Every time she followed the trail, it led to a dead end, until she saw one name pop up again and again, Darien S. Group, listed as a strategic offshore partner. That name clicked. She had seen it scribbled in the margins of her mother's notebook once, almost like a footnote. But at the time it hadn't meant anything. Now it did. Digging deeper, she cross-referenced the Darien S. Group with Harren Corp's public partnerships. Nothing, no record. No press release, not even a whisper in investor reports. Yet here, buried in the shadows of a multi-page document, it was listed as a primary contractor, receiving millions over a 5-year span. Then she found the signature. It was subtle, hidden on a minor annex at the end of the contract, scanned and blurred, but there was no mistaking the initials AVH as Vincent Harren. She sat back in her chair stunned. It was real. Not just implied, he had signed off on this himself. It wasn't some rogue employee, he was complicit. Probably the architect of the entire operation. A sick wave of realization crashed over her. This was more than just corporate fraud. This was the kind of paper trail that could topple a company, possibly bring federal charges. But only if it was handled the right way. Only if it reached the right people. She turned the page and froze. There was a section she hadn't noticed before, written in code. Not a language code, a cipher. Lines of legalese that repeated certain characters and phrases in a pattern that didn't match anything she'd seen in standard contracts. She pulled out her mother's notebook again and skimmed for a reference. One corner held a small paragraph, translated into English if, when they fear exposure, they write in circles. The truth hides where sentences echo. Liana blinked, then looked again. The repeated lines weren't mistakes. They were signals. A form of steganography, hiding information in plain sight. She began circling them, cross-referencing each phrase, and discovered something stunning. This document referenced a confidential transaction log, detailing not just company activity, but the Irish names of politicians who had approved illegal permits in exchange for silent kickbacks. Her breath caught in her throat. She leaned in closer. There were initials next to each amount. Government officials, judges, 2 senators, a major city mayor, all quietly profiting from consulting fees and expedited approvals, all tied back to Vincent Harren through one or more of his shell companies. The last name on the list sent a chill through her. It wasn't a politician. It was her mother, Thutran. The zeros in auto, marked as excess liability. She stared at it, hands trembling. Not paid, not bribed, not a player, excess liability. They hadn't trusted her. She had been seen as a risk, a weak link, not because she knew too much, but because they feared she might talk. And so they removed her. The air felt heavier. The room seemed smaller. Liana slowly set the pages down. Her chest rose and fell in quiet waves. The truth wasn't just inside the document. It was written in the way they treated her mother. As a disposable threat. Something that needed to be cleaned up. She was never meant to find this. She was never meant to read beyond page 2. But Vincent had underestimated her. They all had. And now she wasn't just holding evidence of fraud. She was holding proof of a conspiracy. One that involved the powerful, the elected, and the dangerous. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about finishing what her mother had started, and making sure no one would ever erase them again. The alley behind the old shipping warehouse smelled of oil, rust, and quiet danger. Liana stood alone, her hood up, clutching a worn messenger bag that contained everything. Copies of the translated document, her mother's notebook, and a USB drive encrypted 6 different ways. The message from the hacker, sent through the encrypted whistleblower forum, had been brief and specific: come alone. No tracking devices. Pier 9 midnight. Look for the yellow tag. She glanced around. The world beyond the alley was asleep, but the kind of sleep that pretended not to hear sirens or secrets. The alley's only light flickered from a busted lamp mounted on the side of the warehouse. Shadows moved strangely here, too slow, too uncertain. It was the kind of place where truth lived only if it knew how to hide. Then she saw a yellow tag dangling from a bent wire on a side door. She took a breath, walked toward it, and gave 3 knocks just as instructed. A long pause. Then the door creaked open just enough for her to slip inside. The space beyond was cluttered with ancient servers, dead monitors, and scattered cables like vines on a forgotten machine. The smell of dust was thick. Somewhere in the corner, behind a series of partitions made from stacked filing cabinets, a soft glow pulsed, a screen, and next to it, a figure in a gray hoodie sat, unmoving. You came, the voice said, modulated and genderless, distorted through some kind of real-time filter. Most don't. I didn't come here to flinch, Liana replied. She stepped forward. The figure remained seated, their face obscured by shadow and a wide pair of tinted glasses. Their fingers hovered above a mechanical keyboard, twitching slightly with anticipation. You're the one who posted the redacted document on our board, the hacker asked. Liana nodded. The full version's here, she said, patting the bag. Everything Vincent Harren has tried to bury. A beat of silence. The hacker reached out and took the bag, moving slowly, deliberately. They plugged the USB into a port, and a torrent of code spilled across the screen. Damn. They muttered, eyes scanning the first few decrypted files. You weren't lying. She didn't respond. She was watching their reaction. The way their fingers hesitated. The way their backs straightened as they hit on the offshore accounts, the backdoor payments, the list of officials. Do you have any idea what this is? The hacker finally asked, voice lower now, more serious. This isn't just corporate fraud. It's racketeering, bribery, money laundering. This is an entire infrastructure of criminal enterprise. And your name is all over the digital trail now. You're radioactive. Liana's throat tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. I don't care. I need the world to see it. I need people to know what he did, to my mother, to all of us. The hacker looked up at her for the first time, and in the shifting light, she saw something behind those glasses. Not just curiosity. Not just shock. Respect. You're her daughter, they said. To Tran, she worked with someone I knew. Years ago, we thought she disappeared because she backed out of the leak. But now, they made her disappear, Liana whispered. She was getting too close. The hacker nodded once, as if fitting the final piece into a puzzle they had studied for years. Then you're doing more than bringing down a CEO. You're reopening a case they paid millions to bury. They began typing rapidly, launching programs and encrypted vaults across the screen. The files were being duplicated, mirrored, and sent to multiple black site data centers around the world. It was like watching a digital storm rise in real time. I can leak this safely, the hacker said. eyes fixed on the screen. But it won't be enough. The story has to land right. They'll try to spin this as corporate sabotage, call you a disgruntled intern with a grudge. You need allies. Real ones. Investigative journalists, watchdogs, maybe even international prosecutors. This is a fight, not a headline. I'll do whatever it takes, Liana said, her voice hardening. But I'm not backing down. The hacker smiled slightly. Then you're not alone anymore. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A soft buzz filled the room. The hacker froze, eyes darting to the corner of the screen. We've got a trace. Someone's pinging this location fast. Professional, grade. Liana's heart jumped. How long? Maybe 3 minutes. Maybe less. You need to go now? They yanked the USB out, slipped it into a new drive, and shoved it into her hand. Don't go home, the hacker said. Burn your phone. Use this contact. They scribbled something on a folded card, coordinates and a name. She's ex-intel. She'll hide you. And when the time is right, we'll go public. Liana nodded, gripping the drive like a lifeline. As she slipped back into the night, the alley behind her already fading into darkness, she realized something chilling but true. They were coming for her now. But it was too late. The evidence was already in motion. And the reckoning had already begun. The conference hall gleamed under crystal chandeliers, buzzing with anticipation and false smiles. The annual Shareholder Summit was Harren Corp's crown jewel, a choreographed spectacle of polished speeches, hollow optimism, and champagne toasts to another year of manufactured success. Cameras lined the back of the room. Financial reporters, investors, and corporate elites filled every seat, waiting to be dazzled. At the center of it all stood Vincent Harren. He wore his signature navy suit, crisp as ever, his cufflinks catching the light like stars. He looked every inch the powerful mogul, calm, collected, and confident. His smile, as always, was tight and smug, the smile of a man who had never been told no, and lived to ensure he never would be. He stepped up to the podium, adjusted his microphone, and gave the crowd a quick, charming nod. The applause that followed was automatic, almost mechanical. He held up his hands, letting the adoration quiet down. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice steady, perfectly rehearsed. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a remarkable year for Harren Corp. The words rolled off his tongue like oil, smooth, slick, rehearsed to perfection. Charts lit up behind him, showing growth, expansion, record-breaking profits. He talked of innovation and leadership, of market disruption and ethical vision. The audience nodded along, sipping wine, clapping on cue. It was all going perfectly, until the screen behind him blinked, just once. A flicker, barely noticeable to anyone not watching closely. But then it happened again, this time longer. The sleek presentation slides disappeared. Static filled the massive LD screen. Vincent paused, his eyes narrowing. Apologies. He chuckled, trying to smooth over the disruption. A little technical glitch, it seems. He looked offstage and motioned to the AV team. But they were frozen. The static vanished. The room went still. Then, a new image appeared on the screen. A document, legal in format, stamped with dates and government seals. Another blink and it zoomed in. Paragraphs highlighted in yellow. Clauses translated in both English and Vietnamese. A murmur rippled through the audience. Then came the second image. A flowchart of financial transfers between shell companies, complete with transaction IDs, routing numbers, and matching tax evasion algorithms. Another blink. Now a scanned signature filled the screen, Res V. Harren, and suddenly, Vincent's world tilted. The murmurs turned into whispers, whispers into gasps. On the screen, the presentation shifted again. A voice began to play, Liana's voice, calm and precise, narrating the findings. It was a forensic takedown: offshore laundering, government bribes, internal fraud, and a web of silent conspirators reaching from corporate boardrooms to public office. This isn't fiction, her voice said, unwavering. These are Vincent Harren's approved transactions. These are the names of the officials who signed, and these are the systems designed to bury the truth. Vincent's smile vanished. He stepped back from the podium, face frozen, eyes darting toward the AV booth again. But the texts were gone. A few people in the audience had risen to their feet. Phones were out filming. Some investors were scanning the documents on screen, recognizing names, real names. The kind that don't belong in a fraud report. The kind that appear in headlines. Security moved slowly, unsure whether to approach the stage. Vincent's voice cracked as he tried to interrupt. This is a fabrication. He stammered, but even he didn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. Behind him, the final image took over the screen, a side-by-side photo. On the left, a younger version of Liana's mother, smiling outside a Harren Corp office. On the right, the official missing persons report from years ago. Then, in bold white letters X, she tried to warn them. They silenced her. Now her daughter is speaking. A gasp turned to outrage. Board members in the front row were no longer clapping. They were standing, their faces pale. One of them turned to whisper to another, both clearly shaken. Journalists were already typing. Vincent stumbled backward. Get this off the screen, he barked, voice now sharp and frantic. But it was too late. The hacker had already hijacked the live stream. Dozens of news outlets watching remotely were now broadcasting the leak live. Emails were flooding in. Legal teams were scrambling. Federal regulators had just received a complete copy of the data. And then, as if choreographed, the conference doors opened again. Liana walked in. She wore no badge, no title, no suit. Just a plain black dress and the calm presence of someone who no longer feared anything. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Every eye in the room turned to her. Vincent's face turned a ghostly shade of gray. His jaw clenched. His hands balled into fists. "Security?" he shouted. But they didn't move. Instead, two suited agents from a government bureau walked past Liana and up to the stage. One of them held up a warrant. The other reached for Vincent's wrist. "You are under investigation for corporate fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy," the agent said. Liana watched as the man who had mocked her, dismissed her, tried to erase her mother, stood paralyzed, cuffed in front of the very people he once ruled. His smile, the one that had seemed invincible, was now just a mask slipping off a hollow man. As he was led away, their eyes met. And this time, it was him who looked away first. The silence inside the executive boardroom was no longer the polished quiet of calculated power. It was the suffocating stillness of crumbling walls, of men and women sitting in suits suddenly unsure of the ground beneath their feet. Just hours before, they'd been kings and queens behind glass, sipping coffee poured by assistants and discussing profits that stretched into the billions. Now they sat in the same chairs, but they no longer sat with confidence. The massive display screen mounted on the far wall was frozen on a still frame from the conference leak, Vincent Harren's signature underneath a fraudulent contract, followed by a list of names. Some of theirs included, tied to payouts, commissions, and silent complicity. For most of them, it wasn't the shock of the crimes themselves. It was the horror of being exposed. The head legal officer sat motionless, sweat rolling down his temple as he scrolled through a copy of the leaked documents on his tablet. Beside him, the CFO rubbed her forehead, her breathing shallow, whispering numbers under her breath like she could somehow calculate her way out of what had just happened. At the end of the table, the board chair, a man who'd once toasted Vincent as a visionary beyond his time, now looked like he hadn't slept in a year. "Are the feds still in the building?" someone asked, finally breaking the silence. "Yes," came the answer from a shaken assistant near the door. "They've taken Vincent into custody. They've sealed his office. They're searching the server room now." A few heads dropped into hands. "And the shareholders?" the chair asked. The legal officer looked up slowly. "Half of them have already demanded an emergency vote. The other half are calling for a class action lawsuit." No one moved. There was no plan in place for this. Harren Corp's golden image had shattered like glass on marble, and everyone at this table had either held the hammer or stood by in silence while it was raised. "They want to know what we knew," the CFO said quietly. "How long we've known. What our role was." The implication hung in the air like a storm cloud. Every decision they had signed, every meeting they had attended, every overlooked red flag, they were all now pieces of evidence. One of the younger board members, a man who'd once bragged about being Vincent's protégé, slammed his hand on the table. "We should have stopped him. We knew something was wrong. This isn't just on him." The others stared at him, but no one disagreed. Another voice, this time a woman from the ethics committee, cut through the tension. "He laughed at that girl, threw the document at her like trash. We all saw it, and we did nothing. She brought the truth we ignored." Her words echoed sharply, even without volume. Some of the executives looked away. Some nodded grimly. Others sat frozen, calculating their own survival. Then came the final blow. The door opened without a knock. The company's outside counsel stepped in, his face pale, holding a document folder in both hands. He spoke plainly without the usual corporate performance. "SEC is officially launching a full investigation," he said. "They've frozen all overseas accounts tied to Harren Corp shell firms. The Department of Justice has opened a separate inquiry." The boardroom went dead again. He set the folder on the table, opened it slowly, and slid a paper across to the board chair. "The media has identified Liana Tran. They're calling her the intern who cracked the giant. She's become a symbol of corporate reckoning overnight. Whistleblower protections have already been extended to her by a federal judge. Any retaliation will be considered obstruction." The chair looked down at the paper, then up again, defeated. "She did all this. She didn't just translate the document," the lawyer said. "She exposed the entire system." A silence passed over the room again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was respect. Fear too, maybe. But something else had shifted. Liana wasn't just the intern anymore. She was the reckoning none of them saw coming. The ghost of a silenced mother. The voice they had tried to bury in laughter and condescension, and who had returned with the power of truth in her hands. A few moments later, the head of PR entered the room with a stack of papers and eyes full of panic. "We're hemorrhaging trust. Social media's on fire. Employees are demanding a statement. We need to release something now. The board chair stood slowly, smoothing the front of his suit. He looked around at the group who once ruled with unchecked control. We're not going to lie, he said at last. We own this, every single part of it, and we rebuild, if we can, from what she revealed. The others said nothing, but no one disagreed. The air inside the room had shifted permanently. The chill wasn't from broken air conditioning. It was the chill of accountability, of decades of silence finally cracking wide open. The boardroom, once a fortress of power, had turned cold, and it would never feel warm again. Liana stood in front of the weathered door, her knuckles hovering in the air, unsure whether to knock. The apartment building was nothing like the polished glass towers of Harren Corp. It was old, quiet, and smelled faintly of damp wood and forgotten lives. Apartment 3B. That's what the card from the hacker had said. A name handwritten in quick scrawl of Mira Ahn. Her breath fogged lightly in the hallway's dim light. The air was thick, not with fear, but with expectation. This place, this person, held a part of the puzzle she hadn't been able to decode. The part that had haunted her for years, what had really happened to her mother. She knocked. A few seconds passed before the door creaked open. The woman who appeared on the other side looked like she hadn't slept in years. Her eyes were sharp, but there was exhaustion carved deep into her features. She didn't speak at first, just studied Liana like someone measuring whether to open a gate or slam it shut. Then she stepped aside and said quietly, "Come in." Inside, the apartment was cluttered but clean. Books, folders, and hard drives were stacked like miniature skyscrapers around a small desk with an aging laptop. There were newspaper clippings pinned to a corkboard. A map. Red threads. Names. It was the kind of place that didn't forget things. "I worked with your mother," Mira said, gesturing to the couch. Not directly, but close enough to know what she was chasing. "We warned her to stop. She didn't listen." Liana sat slowly, heart pounding. "Why didn't you help her?" Mira gave a bitter smile. "We tried. But Harren Corp wasn't just a company. It was a machine. The deeper she dug, the more they watched. She thought if she worked quietly, no one would notice. But they noticed. And when she refused to walk away, they made a choice. What did they do?" Liana asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Mira paused, staring down at her clasped hands. "She found something," she said. "A link between Harren Corp and a covert fund used to bribe regulatory officials in Southeast Asia. It wasn't just money. It was land grabs, environmental cover-ups, stolen patents. Your mother translated the original contracts, and she realized the Vietnamese document she'd been given had been altered to erase key clauses. She had the unaltered version, and she planned to go public." Liana's chest tightened. "She told me she was going away for a few days." She looked scared, but she smiled. Mira nodded slowly. She was scared. But she also believed if she could prove the truth, someone would listen. "She never came back," Liana said. "No one filed a report. The company denied she ever raised concerns. Even the police brushed me off." "She wasn't just silenced," Mira said grimly. "She was erased." A long silence fell between them. Liana looked toward the corkboard on the wall. Among the clippings was a photo she hadn't seen in years. Her mother at her old desk, smiling, mid-conversation with someone off camera. Liana stood and walked toward it, fingers trembling. "I thought she abandoned me," she said quietly. "Part of me always wondered if maybe she left by choice." "She never would have," Mira said gently. "She loved you more than anything. She told me once if anything happened to her, you'd find the truth. She believed in you, even then." Liana turned, eyes damp. "Then why didn't anyone speak up? Why didn't you?" Mira looked away, shame flickering across her face. "Because I was a coward, and because back then no one thought Harren Corp could be touched. They buried people with lawsuits, blacklisted whistleblowers, threatened families. I wasn't brave like your mother." Liana swallowed hard. "I'm not brave either," she said. "I was angry, and I was tired of being quiet." Mira smiled, not bitterly this time, but with something else, something softer. "Hope. You don't know how much that means. You've done what none of us could. You made them listen. You forced them to look." Liana reached into her bag and pulled out the worn notebook, her mother's. She placed it on the table gently, like it was made of glass. "She left this behind," she said. "It guided me through every lie they tried to hide. I think she knew I'd need it." Mira opened the notebook, flipping through the pages with reverent fingers. She stopped on a page filled with careful annotations, symbols, and an underlined phrase in Vietnamese. She read it out loud. "The voice they try to bury is the one that echoes the loudest." She wrote that the night before she disappeared. Mira whispered. "She told me truth always finds a way." Liana sat beside her, watching the notebook. Not as a relic of the past anymore, but as a torch passed forward. "She didn't die in silence," Liana said. "She just needed someone to finish what she started." Mira nodded. And in that small apartment filled with forgotten documents and whispered memories, Liana felt something shift. The truth behind her mother's silence was no longer a mystery. It was a mission. And she wasn't alone anymore. The sky outside Harren Corp's headquarters was streaked with gold as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the glass towers. Inside, the air felt different, heavier, quieter. The storm had passed, but its aftermath was still settling over every corridor, every office, every executive floor that once pulsed with untouchable arrogance. Liana stood at the far end of the boardroom, her arms crossed loosely over her chest as she stared out the window. Behind her, murmurs filled the room, voices she recognized now. Not just board members or executives, but journalists, investigators, human rights attorneys, and compliance auditors. What used to be a place where cover-ups were written and signed was now being used to build something else. Something cleaner? The door opened with a soft creak. The chair of the board, Michael Langford, entered, looking thinner than he had the day Vincent was arrested. He no longer wore the air of absolute control, but something far closer to humility. He nodded toward her, motioning toward the seat at the end of the table. Liana didn't sit. "We owe you a debt that can't be measured," he said. "We've spent the last 2 weeks reviewing everything your team exposed. The DOJ, the SEC, they all agree. If you hadn't stepped forward, this company would have destroyed 100 more lives before ever being caught. I didn't do it for thanks," she replied, voice steady. "And I didn't do it for the company. I know," he said, hands clasped. "But what you did, it's changed everything." There was a pause. Then he reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table toward her. She didn't move. "It's an offer," he said. "We've removed every board member tied to the fraud. Legal restructuring is underway. What we need now is someone to help rebuild trust from the inside, someone with integrity." She opened the folder slowly. Inside was a letter, an official appointment offer, a director of global ethics and compliance, her name typed cleanly at the top, a 6-figure salary, full authority to audit, investigate, and report directly to the new ethics committee. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "this isn't charity. This isn't image management. We need you because you're the only one who made us face ourselves. And because we believe in what you're trying to do." Liana stared at the page for a long time. The title meant nothing to her. The salary meant even less. She closed the folder gently. "So now that Vincent's gone, you want me to clean up the mess?" He looked away ashamed. "Yes, because none of us can do it without you." She turned to the window again. The city below was pulsing with life, unaware of the quiet negotiation unfolding at the top of a company that had once buried truths in the dark. "When I was 15, she said, voice soft, I sat outside a government office for hours. I was trying to report my mother's disappearance. No one would help me. No one even believed she mattered. I made a promise to myself that day. If I ever had a chance to make them look, really look, I'd never stay silent again." Langford nodded. "You kept that promise." "I did," she said. "But this company doesn't need a savior. It needs accountability. That's why we want you," he said. "Not as a face, as a force." She turned to face him, eyes sharp now. "Then here are my terms." He straightened. "Full transparency, no buried settlements. Every case I touch, the public sees it. Every corrupt contract I find, I name names. Yours included if it comes to that." He nodded slowly. "Secondly," she said, "you establish a whistleblower protection program with federal oversight. No more interns getting laughed out of rooms for doing the right thing." "We can do that," he said without hesitation. "And third," she finished, her voice lower, steadier, "you publicly acknowledge my mother. By name. She was the first to uncover the fraud, the one you all ignored." Langford swallowed hard, his eyes glossy with guilt. "You have my word." There was a long pause. Liana looked down at the folder once more. She saw her name, typed bold, undeniable. "I'm not here to fix you," she said. "I'm here to make sure no one like Vincent ever walks through these doors again without a reckoning." He nodded. "That's more than we deserve. But exactly what we need." She didn't shake his hand. Instead, she walked out of the room with the folder tucked under her arm. Not as a prize, but as a weapon. One she would use carefully, deliberately. Outside the boardroom, a young intern passed her wide-eyed, holding a notebook. She looked just like Liana had once looked. Overlooked, dismissed. They locked eyes. The girl smiled nervously. "Miss Tran." Liana smiled gently. "Call me Liana," she said. "And if anyone ever mocks you again for asking too many questions, send them to me." The courtroom was filled with a cold, clinical silence. Marble floors, towering windows, and the weight of justice in the air. It was nothing like the chaos of boardrooms or the sleek, fabricated calm of corporate headquarters. Here, there were no spin doctors, no executive assistants to deflect blame, no closed-door meetings to rewrite truth. Here, only facts mattered. And for Vincent Harren, the facts were damning. He sat at the defense table, his once sharp suit hanging awkwardly on a body that had lost the confident edge it once carried. His face, once plastered on magazine covers as the golden boy of global finance, now bore lines not of age, but of unraveling. His eyes scanned the jury, his last hope, his last grip on a world he no longer controlled. Liana sat just a few rows behind the prosecution bench. Her presence was silent but thunderous. She wore no press badge, no official title pinned to her. She didn't need one. Every eye that landed on her knew who she was. She wasn't just the intern anymore. She was the one who had cracked the walls open and let the rot spill out into the light. The prosecutor stood slowly and delivered the closing statement. For years, he said, voice clear and piercing, Mr. Harren profited from a machine built on manipulation, exploitation, and fear. He believed he could buy silence. He believed that people in lower positions, people like translators, interns, and whistleblowers, would stay quiet, because they always had. But he was wrong. He gestured toward the evidence screens. Images flashed, documents Liana had uncovered, payment trails rerouted through false NGOs, emails Vincent thought had been deleted forever. Each image was a nail in the coffin. And when one young woman dared to ask questions, dared to lift a stone no one else would touch, he mocked her. He laughed. The prosecutor turned to the jury, voice low now. That was his fatal mistake. As he sat, a hush fell over the room. The judge called for a recess before the jury's deliberation. Vincent's attorney leaned toward him, whispering furiously, but he didn't respond. His gaze was locked on Liana now, as if seeing her for the first time not as a girl, not as a threat, but as something far more terrifying to a man like him, consequence. Liana stood and exited the courtroom, not because she couldn't bear to watch, but because she didn't need to. The outcome no longer belonged to her. She had done what her mother never got the chance to finish. She had spoken when silence was expected. And now the world was listening. Outside, the sun was bright, blinding against the courthouse steps. Reporters clustered like bees, calling her name, asking for statements, reaching out with microphones and questions like weapons. She ignored them all. Then came a voice, not from the press but from someone older, gentler. Ms. Tran. She turned. It was an elderly woman with soft eyes and a trembling smile. Her hands held a laminated photo. A man in work clothes, standing proudly in front of a warehouse. My husband worked for Harren Corp, the woman said, voice cracking. They cut his pension when he got sick. He died thinking it was his fault. But what you did? Her voice broke completely. You gave him back his dignity. Liana didn't speak. She simply embraced the woman, holding her for a long, quiet moment that no camera caught and no headline reported. That was the part of the truth no one could monetize. Hours later, when the jury returned with their verdict, the entire courtroom rose. Guilty, on all counts. Vincent sat frozen, eyes blank as the judge read the sentencing date. The empire he had built on manipulation and arrogance crumbled in that instant. No golden parachute, no final press release. Just the quiet click of handcuffs and the rustle of paper as court officers led him away. And as they passed Liana's row, he turned slightly. One last glance, the last fragments of power leaking from his gaze. He opened his mouth, maybe to curse her, maybe to plead, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence itself was louder than anything he could have said. Outside, the headline ticker scrolled across giant LED boards. Harren Corp CEO found guilty in historic fraud case. Whistleblower praised as hero. As the crowd dispersed, Liana walked toward the subway, no motorcade, no escort. Just her, the city, and the freedom that only truth could bring. And somewhere in the deepest, most guarded chamber of Vincent's collapsing ego, her face would live forever. Not as the quiet intern he once laughed at, but as the woman who tore down his kingdom with nothing more than a folder, a voice and unshakable resolve. She didn't need to laugh back at him. The truth had done it for her. Months passed. The name, Liana Tran, became a symbol far beyond the halls of Harren Corp. Universities invited her to speak. Whistleblower laws were rewritten in her wake. Interns, translators, and junior staff everywhere found new courage to speak up, knowing they were not invisible anymore. Yet Liana didn't chase fame. She turned down television interviews, book deals, and the corporate offers that poured in. Instead, she founded the Quiet Voice Project, an independent nonprofit that protected and empowered low-level employees in major industries to safely report unethical practices. She staffed it with people like Mira, like the hacker from the alley, and young women who had once been told to know their place. Her office was small, modest, but the impact was massive. One afternoon, as she locked up for the day, she passed a mural painted across the brick wall of a nearby building. It showed a faceless woman standing tall over crumbling skyscrapers, holding a sheet of paper above her head. Below it, a quote from her mother, now immortalized. The voice they try to bury is the one that echoes the loudest. Liana smiled. Justice, she had learned, wasn't loud. It didn't always arrive with applause or fireworks. Sometimes it was just the soft, steady sound of truth refusing to be silenced.
In the end, power doesn't belong to those who speak the loudest. It belongs to those who refuse to stay silent. Liana didn't need a title or a spotlight. All she needed was the courage to stand for the truth. And in doing so, she reminded the world, even the quietest voice can bring down giants. Remember, integrity is louder than mockery, and justice, though silent at first, always finds its voice